You believe your debt is a personal problem, a miscalculation, a poor financial decision, maybe even a moral failure. Now, imagine that this is exactly what they want you to think. Because while you blame yourself for a maxed-out credit card, there's a $338 trillion financial machine operating silently around the planet. And that machine doesn't work despite debt. It works because of it. $338 trillion. That's the figure recorded by the Institute of International Finance in the second quarter of 2025. To put it in perspective, that's 3.25 times everything humanity produces in an entire year. Every person on Earth, from newborns in Tokyo to elders in Lagos, technically carries about $40,000 of debt on their back. But here's what the numbers hide. That debt isn't distributed equally, nor does it mean the same thing for everyone. When you take on debt, you sell your future. You promise to deliver hours of work you haven't yet done, days of life you haven't yet lived. It's time turned into a commodity. But when governments go into debt, when corporations go into debt, when entire nations live permanently on credit, something far deeper is happening. It's not just about paying bills. It's about who controls tomorrow. Think of Sri Lanka, that island in the Indian Ocean once called Ceylon. In 2017, the government in Colombo couldn't pay $13.2 billion owed to China. The solution? Hand over the strategic port of Hambantota for 99 years. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a conquest without a single shot fired. Just signatures on contracts and the silent movement of money through banking systems. A critical infrastructure changed hands, and with it, the country's sovereignty. Now multiply that by dozens of nations. The United Nations Conference on Trade and Development reported that 3.4 billion people live in countries whose governments spend more paying interest on debt than investing in health or education. 3.4 billion human beings whose hospitals, schools, and futures are being sacrificed to feed invisible creditors. In Angola, in southern Africa, social spending dropped 55%, not by choice, but by necessity, imposed by the brutal arithmetic of repayments. And here lies a devastating irony. While you worry about your car loan payments, entire countries are paying $25 billion more in interest than they receive in new loans. It's money flowing from the poor to the rich, disguised as economic normality. It's wealth extraction legitimized by treaties and contracts. But how did we get here? How did humanity build such a perfect financial prison that even the guards are trapped inside it? The history of global debt is not accidental. It's engineered. And its foundations were built with blood and gunpowder, long before computers and digital stock exchanges. Every major explosion of indebtedness coincides precisely with wars, crises, and restructurings of global power. It's not coincidence, it's system design. Begin in Washington, D.C. In the year 1791, the debt of the young nation born from the War of Independence stood at $75 million. Alexander Hamilton, Secretary of the Treasury, did something revolutionary. He consolidated all state debts under the federal government. He created trust in American credit, and for 44 years, through taxes and land sales, the United States paid it all off. In 1835, federal debt was zero. It was the only time in history, and it didn't last, because then came the wars. The Civil War exploded the debt from $65 million to $2.7 billion between 1860 and 1865. World War I raised it to $22 billion. But it was World War II that revealed the true potential of debt as an instrument. From $51 billion in 1940 to $260 billion in 1946. Globally, advanced economies reached 150% of GDP in debt. It was the price of defeating the Axis, but also the demonstration that governments could create money from the future to fund the present. Then, in 1971, something fundamental changed. Again in Washington, Richard Nixon abandoned the gold standard. Dollars no longer had to be convertible into precious metal. It was total liberation. Money could be created without physical backing, only by the authority of the state and the trust of markets. What seemed technical was actually philosophical. Value stopped being tangible and became abstract based on promises and perceptions. And with that abstraction came expansion. The oil shock of 1973 flooded banks with petrodollars that needed to be lent out. Dictators and democracies across the global south received abundant, cheap credit. Until, in 1981, in New York, the Federal Reserve sharply raised interest rates. The dollar soared. Dollar-denominated debts of poor countries became unpayable overnight. In August of 1982, in Mexico City, the Mexican government declared a moratorium. More than 50 countries plunged into simultaneous crises. The IMF and World Bank offered bailouts, but with conditions. Cut public spending, privatize state enterprises, open your markets. It was aid tied to submission. Fast forward to 1997, Southeast Asia. Massive private debts in Thailand, Indonesia, and South Korea collapsed entire economies. In Jakarta, Indonesia, 28 million people fell below the poverty line in just 2 years. Protesters filled the streets, demanding justice, but creditors demanded austerity. And then came 2008, the global financial crisis that began on Wall Street with subprime loans and spread like contagion. Banks were rescued, but people lost their homes. Governments took on private debt to save the system. And soon after, in 2010, Athens, Greece, became the symbol of a new crisis: European sovereign debt. Greece, Ireland, and Portugal needed humiliating bailouts. Every crisis follows the same pattern: explosion of cheap credit, sudden collapse, bailout conditioned on austerity, transfer of assets to creditors. It's a cycle that repeats because it's profitable for those at the top of the financial pyramid. Hook for Chapter 3. But wait. If this pattern has repeated for centuries, if every crisis strengthens the same actors, then the real question isn't when will it end? It's what is it all for? The truth no one wants to say aloud is simple and disturbing. Global debt is not a problem to be solved. It's a system to be maintained. Because as long as mass debt exists, mass control exists. And that control operates in 3 dimensions we rarely connect. First dimension, social control. Studies of student debt in the United States show that carrying debt produces not only financial pressure, it produces fear, sadness, anger, and clinically measurable symptoms of depression. It's systematic psychic exhaustion. Indebted people delay marriage, children, life projects. They accept jobs they despise because they need the paycheck. Debt becomes an invisible chain anchoring you to the present, preventing any radically different future. In the United Kingdom, austerity policies cut cultural funding. Libraries closed, small theaters vanished. Music programs in schools dropped from 55.3% to 37.2% between 2009 and 2014. It's not just economics, it's deliberate civilizational impoverishment. Second dimension, geopolitical control. Again in Washington, now in 2024, the United States spent $879.9 billion just on interest payments for the federal debt. That exceeded the defense budget. Military leaders warn that America's ability to project power is threatened not by foreign enemies but by internal arithmetic. Every dollar sent to creditors is a dollar not funding aircraft carriers, intelligence, or diplomacy. It's erosion of hegemony through indebtedness. Meanwhile, in Beijing, the Chinese government lends trillions through the Belt and Road Initiative. 75 vulnerable countries owe $22 billion in payments due in 2025. And when they can't pay, there's no forgiveness. There's renegotiation involving strategic concessions, ports, railways, natural resources. It's imperialism by debt, and it works because it's legal, contractual, invisible. Third dimension, temporal control. Debt forces us to live in the present to pay for the past, mortgaging the future. It's a machine that kidnaps collective time. When 3.4 billion people live in nations that prioritize interest payments over building hospitals, what's being stolen isn't just money. It's human potential: scientists who won't be trained, treatments that won't be developed, technologies that won't be invented. It's the future being canceled in installments. And here's the final revelation: the creditors themselves are trapped. China holds trillions in U.S. Treasury bonds. If it sold them all at once, it would strengthen its own currency and hurt its exports. The United States can't let debt collapse, because tens of trillions in pensions, insurance, and global funds are invested in Treasury securities. It's mutually destructive interdependence. No one can hit the red button without blowing themselves up. The United States can't let debt collapse, because tens of trillions in pensions, insurance, and global funds are invested in Treasury securities. It's mutually destructive interdependence. No one can hit the red button without blowing themselves up. Meanwhile, projections show that American debt will reach $52 trillion by 2035. Global debt will keep rising. New crises will emerge, new bailouts, new transfers of power, And each time it happens, they'll say it was unpredictable, extraordinary, exceptional, but you already know the truth. There's nothing exceptional. It's the system working exactly as designed. Debt isn't the bug, it's the feature. And while you worry about your personal payments, while governments debate cuts and hikes, the machine keeps spinning silent and relentless, turning time into money, sovereignty into dependence, future into collateral. $338 trillion don't weigh on the world. They are the world. And now you know the weight you carry.